Brew, do you like these moves, locking up Higgins and Chase?
The offense, one of the most dynamic offenses in the league. We get to see that intact. Obviously, the question is defense. The charge is for them to get to the Super Bowl. Teams that have reached the Super Bowl with the lowest ranked defenses this century. Now, the question is, what are they going to do with the defense? But yeah, there's pressure on Joe Burrow. There's pressure on Zach Taylor. There's pressure on these two receivers that just got paid. You know who the most pressure's on?
And who might that be? All right, I know I did a lot of cutting around and, putting things in order the way I like it, to where, I'm posing a question and I'll be answering. Or they're posing a question and I'm answering. But just to get this out the way, I'm an Eagles fan, but I try to look through a fair lens. I'm not going to be biased. I'm going to give a fair, honest shake to the Ohio team, the Cincinnati Bengals, because we know that they're one of the most dynamic offenses you see in the league. I mean, star-studded, with, 2 stars at wide receiver, a mega star in Joe Burrow at quarterback, a good offensive mind in Zach Taylor. But their issue is that they're like this. They're so unbalanced. That team is leaning to one side of the scale, and that is offense. The defense is an afterthought. And they're cheap, and they should have waited to pay both of these guys, the receivers, and now they're quite literally paying the price for that mistake. And there's a lot of things set up wrong, and it really makes you grateful. One reason I really set out to do this video was like, man, this made me thank my lucky stars that we have a good front office, and Howie Roseman at the front, our GM leading the charge to avoid these kind of issues where teams are waiting to the last minute to, pay off their debts. And then, they're indebted to these guys and they rake them over the coals. And, Jamar Chase, he was going to go out and be, the highest non-paid quarterback. We knew that coming in, but, I didn't know I didn't think they were going to hold on to T. Higgins. I actually thought they should have, roll with, Burton, the 3rd round pick, and the receiver out of Princeton, who I think he could step up, and those two could be, parts of a whole, working alongside Chase that make that offense better. And they could have saved, $115 million over 4 years. But, hey, I'm all for it, having teams screw themselves over, be badly run, and, not take themselves out of contention. Because for that price tag, they could have, paid Hendrickson. They could have brought in a couple more pieces in free agency, paid some of their guys, their stars that are due. And, the fact they're not going to be able to do that takes them out of the equation, to most likely have, successful runs at, at the apple, bites at the apple for the championships, But that's the way that a lot of teams choose to run it, run their franchises. And it's highly unsuccessful. We'll get to, later examples of, teams running things that way before they realize, at least in a sliver, even just a minute amount, that, hey, we cannot, operate, devoting all of our salary cap, to a chunk of guys at the top. And it can't be on one side of the ball. You have to, score points, and you have to be able to stop guys. Without being able to do those two things to, a certain, refined degree, you are not gonna have the success that that you need to have in pivotal spots to be able to go out there and put up more points than people and to stop people when you need to. But look at the stats. They're out there fighting for their lives on the offense. This team is 27th in points per game, 6th ranked in the NFL. But then they turn around and let their opponents put up a large amount of points. They put up 365 yards, 9th in the NFL. But then they let their opponents put up 348 yards. They're only team with 25 points per game scored, and then 25 points per game allowed to the other team's offense. I mean, that just, you're gonna be having a shootout each and every week, and if you don't play perfect, you don't take advantage of teams and just run them into the ground, they're gonna come back scoring, or they're gonna come back and compete and get them into the match, because you got to be able to stop people at some point. So when we played them, the Eagles played them. It was neck and neck for the early going. Then they just couldn't compete because they couldn't stop us, and that put pressure on their offense. Like, I'm glad that Howard Roseman doesn't put Jalen Hurts in his conundrum, sink or swim. Hey, you got to go out there every week and blow guys the fuck out. Otherwise, we're not going to be even in the running to win these games. That's a lot of pressure to put on these guys. And as good as they are, as high as the rankings are, as high as the ratings are, one slip up and they're falling behind to the Eagles. And that gap just keeps on widening because they play themselves into a hole. They end up being one-dimensional. They can't even lean on their strengths as a passing offense, because you need to be able to do more than one thing. Otherwise, teams are going to have you figured out. I mean, and you haven't learned your lesson. You're paying these guys a high premium. You're not going to be able to pay everybody. And I get it. You want to hold on to your premium talent, but at what cost? At what cost? Nick Wright made an excellent point. This is the Peyton Manning model. How well did that work out for him? 13 years of Peyton Manning in Indianapolis, and all they had to do, all they had to show for it was one championship, because it was top heavy offense. You had Brandon Stokely and Reggie Wayne and Marvin Harrison all having 1,000-yard seasons, and then they ran into the buzzsaw known as the Patriots in the playoffs each and every year. Well, defense just flummoxed Manning, and they were able to grind it out, put up enough points, play tough weather ball, run the ball, have Tom Brady hit receivers kind of like Jalen did this year, and key spots, and they were winning these games 20-17 or 20-9, just destroying them on offense. It wasn't until they fielded a decent defensive unit where they actually started making some progress. They were able to beat the Colts, the Chiefs that year, and advanced to the Super Bowl, where they blew out the Bears, destroyed them, and the defense did a lot of that dismantling, and they were able to pay two bookends, not just one guy. Not just one Trey Hendrickson. They had Dwight Freeney, and they had Robert Mathis. So you got to have some semblance of balance, to the force. Can't just be all the dark side. You got to have some lifestyle techniques too. So historically speaking, it's just not a goal to aim for. Win the Super Bowl with the average to mediocre defense, and we can see in this graphic that teams that the Colts won it, with a 23rd ranked defense, and you see the Chiefs in 2022, they won it with a 16th ranked defense, an average defense, but they came to play. And the Giants, they showed up with a 20th ranked defense, and defenses that weren't the best, 25th ranked, but they could always show up when they needed it. But this defense with the Bengals, they're downtrodden, man. They're down bad. They don't have anybody like that, you know what I'm saying? Outside of Hendrickson, he's playing them by himself, the talent isn't there, so you want to be able to outscore people, yes. But if teams are able to keep the ball away from you, your defense is going to get tired out there. You can't, you can't have one squad doing it all on their own. It's got to be ebb and flow. So I'm glad that Howie, knows that and equips Jalen with great defenses. And the year we didn't, in 2023, we couldn't, do it all. We didn't have a defense that could go out there and compete, and it really showed. That was a huge reason that we had a collapse. And the reciprocity, offense, scores points, gives the defense the time to rest, and the defense gives the offense more opportunities to score. That goes hand in hand, man. It has to be like that. Just outscoring your opponent, as Brew pointed out, ain't working, because they went 3-4. Look at this graphic, when scoring 33 or more points last year. I mean, that's crazy. Like, they were, hanging with teams, and it came out to, heart palpitating shootout, And they end up losing because, you make one or two mistakes and that's the fucking game. Like Joe Burrow was leading them back, but he had to climb himself out of a hole. And because the defense, wasn't stopping anybody. Like, the balance of probabilities you win in those type of games, you're going to lose some. Because it just, mistakes happen. The more you air it out, the more, you're putting the ball at risk. The more you're making a way for the defense to go out there and make plays on the other side. Run the ball with Saquon. I'm not saying it's not risk free. He had some fluky fumbles. One shouldn't have called a fumble in the Jaguars game, but it's a safer game plan to put the ball on the ground. Pause. Not dropping an image, but then to air it out. And we see that teams are gonna be more run balance. See, saw the way the Ravens running the ball this past year. Just, had way more success imposing their will on the ground. And it's a completely different ball game. Mentally pushing people around. You dominate them. You destroy their will. Moving a man against his will is one of the most demoralizing things you could do out there. But they're the only team to ever do this. Go 3-4. I think the rest of the league was like what it says there, like 70 plus and 7, like 76 and 7. Insane, man. And I agree with Chris Broussard in saying that this puts a tremendous amount of pressure on Joe Burrow and T. Higgins and Jamar Chase and Chase Brown. But also, who was that question posed to? Who was that question about? The new defensive coordinator, Al Golden. Like, he can get the job done, as could the previous defensive coordinator. But when the cupboard is bare and you have scraps to work with to put together a piecemeal defense, you're always going to come up short. Like, you're going to be, a linebacker who can't, drop it his own short. You're going to be a corner who's getting toasted short. You're going to be a safety who can't fill, who isn't able to play in the box and play, deep, short. Going to be a pass rusher short. Going to be light in the defensive tackle box short. Guys who are short on technique. I mean, there's so many things that could pop up because you're not well equipped on defense and you just have lack of talent. It's like Hollywood industry sacrifice for fame. You pay the price. You get what you need on offense, but you're severely lacking on the other side. And I also agree that you're asking for perfection when it comes to your GM, Duke Tobin, and hitting in the draft. Like, he's got to be like perfect, man. Finding immediate impact players who when you're ill-equipped to pay in free agency. Like, you're not able to bring in talent that you need. Ideally, built from the draft, 70%, free agency, trades. Those are minority. But you primarily build, through bringing in, selecting players out of college. And then you want to reward the select few that you highlight that, hey, this guy's a foundational guy. This guy's a blue chip guy, a red chip guy. We want to extend him and have him continue to contribute to the team, not just lose out on the investment that you put into this player for, several years. And then when they're, you put all that sweat, time, equity, investment into these players to see them reap the rewards, see other franchises reap the rewards of your hard labor. It's got to be demoralizing. And then, the guys too, look around the locker room. Who's here originally that's on the, first contract, on their second contract? Now, a lot of guys, they lose faith in you. That's got to be, affecting their loyalty. Why should I even, trust you? I'm going to be out of here. So anyway, let me just go ahead and, get things ready. So you got to wash, rinse, repeat that every 4 years. That's tough. That's handicapping him to some degree from doing his job. So, last point, Howie Roseman's usage of void years to make the most of Windows is expert level. Yeah, I get it. It's a lot of risk involved in it, What if those things don't work out? Because we just had a guy who we extended on next day and we offered a contract on our free agency. Bryce Huff didn't work out, but fortunately enough, it's only 3 years, $17 million per year, $51 million deal, and we can get out after the second year. But right now we're locked in. We can't trade him, I don't believe. But we identify guys like Devonta Smith, like AJ Brown, like the whole O-line, except for Cam Jenkins at the moment. You extend those guys, extend them early, and then you add years onto their coexisting deals, or the existing deals, and be able to pay them. Well, they'll be the highest paid, but that's in a future deal. But they're satisfied because they see that you're willing to pay them commensurate to the talent, and that's huge, and you need an owner to sign off on that. And Jeffrey Lurie, we cannot do this without him. He's a pivotal piece of that pie. He commits all that financial equity to those deals. I mean, without his John Hancock, Roseman ain't doing none of this shit, But yeah, it's a balancing of the scales, because we're gonna pay the price when those 4 years come. When that credit card that we're using like that, when that interest comes due, we're gonna have to lay low for a little bit and reload. Let the cap numbers be released, and then be able to start over. But that's the risk you play with when you use the cap like that. But the reward has not been great, and I just don't see the Bengals stepping into that territory until they renew their way of thinking. But hopefully they don't, because I love seeing the Eagles dominate. But hey, I know the truth of the matter is that we're at the end of the video, but you're not even watching though. But it's all good, because I love making these videos and I love talking about the freaking stinking Philadelphia Eagles. So we're trying to do this officially, but as always, it's fly Eagles fly, and let's motherfucking go.
Like, comment, share, subscribe if you Thanks for watching. Check me out at Cintron Anime, Cintron Life, or Cintron Laughs, or other social media.